Welcome to Raging Moderates. I'm Jessica Tarlov. I'm joined today by Representative Jason Crow, Congressman from Colorado. He's been in Congress since 2019 and serves on the House Intelligence Committee. He's also a decorated Army veteran, having served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he's the perfect person to talk with here on this 4th of July. Congressman, thanks so much for joining me.
Jessica, thank you.
Last week, the Supreme Court issued a ruling involving Trump's executive order attempting to repeal birthright citizenship. The court didn't rule whether it was or wasn't constitutional. What did you make of the ruling and the conversation around whether birthright citizenship is part of the American experiment?
Well, I just got out of the Iran strike brief and finished reading the court case. It's not a ruling on the substance of birthright citizenship. What it appears to be is a ruling on the ability of one district court, and there's actually 94 districts in the United States, but one of those individual district courts to issue a nationwide injunction on this issue that would apply to the 93 others. So essentially, it's limiting district court jurisdiction, but fell short of actually ruling on the issue itself. Ultimately, there will need to be a Supreme Court ruling on this issue of birthright citizenship, which is enshrined in our Constitution.
Does it surprise you that the Trump administration is going after birthright citizenship?
No, it doesn't. And it shouldn't surprise anybody because they've said this for a very long time. It's been in their plans. And listen, Stephen Miller is kind of the wizard behind the curtain here for Trump on issues of immigration. He has said for a long time what he wants to do. Right? He doesn't believe in immigration. He doesn't believe we should be a nation of immigrants and doesn't believe in our history and heritage of immigration. And it doesn't really matter who you are or what you look like. He just doesn't believe in it. And he also doesn't believe in birthright citizenship. So long as he continues to call the shots and issue policy, I think we will continue to see, pretty terrible things like this coming out of the White House.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's linked to the immigration question. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this because it's something that I struggle with, like, as a Democrat who has endeavored to accept the November results and understand how badly the Democrats ceded the immigration issue to Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Obviously an unacceptable amount of people coming across the border in the first 3 years of the Biden administration. I get it. And I can understand why people were feeling connected to Trump's message. But as they see his immigration policy get implemented, they don't like it. We're seeing our highest numbers ever. The new Quinnipiac poll showing 64% favor a pathway to citizenship. It was 55% just like a year ago. So obviously things are changing rapidly. What do you make of the current, status of the immigration debate? And what do you think Democrats are offering that's different?
Couldn't agree with you more on how the last administration, the Biden administration, fell short. They basically wanted to not talk about the issue. Right? They wanted to ignore it and just pretend it wasn't an issue and fully give it to Congress. That clearly was a mistake because, any of us who were in Congress and going home to our districts every weekend and every week doing town halls, talking to folks, knew it was a problem, knew that people want a secure border. And in my experience, where the vast majority of Americans is they want a secure border. They actually want a system that works, that allows for lawful, legal immigration. They want the visa system to work better, but they also want compassion. They want humanity at the border. They want the ability to accept refugees who are properly vetted. They want the ability for dreamers and our young folks who came here and have lived here and know nothing but this country to have permanent residency with a pathway to citizenship, and people who actually own homes and are paying taxes and own businesses and want to have citizenship to also have a pathway to that as well. That is where the vast majority of Americans are. Right. And they reject this idea of mass deportation of families and children and people who are peaceful in our communities. They don't want that either. So, we're in this position where Americans are in a place that's vastly different from most of the political discussion that's happening in Washington. And that's why we need, a bipartisan solution ultimately.
Do you think we're going to get one of those anytime soon? I know that we did have the Senate version of the bill, and Donald Trump personally didn't want it because he wanted to campaign on it, and he was correct. I don't know if he would have won without it, frankly. Are you hopeful about it? Do you feel like Democrats have taken enough control of the issue that we could actually come out and say, like, this is our plan, stick with us?
Yeah, not yet. I mean, I'm pushing it. Others are pushing it. I think we need to be more honest with folks about what I just talked about the fact that, most Americans do want a secure border, but they also want compassion and humanity, and they want people to have due process too, right? That is just where people are. And there's not enough talk about that. And so long as Donald Trump is in the White House and Republicans control Congress, I'm not optimistic that anything rational and reasonable is going to move. I'm just not. I think what's going to have to happen is there's going to be have to be a new iteration, a new administration, a new iteration of Congress for us to actually have the conversation that we need to have and strike that compromise. Like, as you mentioned, there was that compromise last year
Yeah.
that was heavily negotiated, and like any compromise, which actually is something crazy called legislating, right? It's
Go
like there
figure.
is this crazy thing called legislating, and it requires compromise. It requires that no side gets everything they want. So there were things in that deal that I didn't like, but there were many things that I did, and that's just where we need to be.
Yeah. I always was frequently referring to the fact that James Langford was the principal negotiator on the Republican side, who is no dove. He's not a squishy conservative.
Yeah, he's not a
No,
moderate.
I would love to have him on, but he does not fit the raging moderate moniker of the podcast at all. And
Yeah,
he still thought the deal was
yeah.
decent enough to do. We're talking about immigration here, and a lot of how Donald Trump has framed that as about nationalism and protecting America. And you mentioned that you just got out of the intel briefing about the strikes in Iran on the nuclear sites. And I'd love to hear a bit, they told you, or what you could share, but can you discuss it in the context of the comments that Secretary Hegseth has been making, that essentially it's un-American to be critical at all of the mission or to have any questions
Mm.
about the mission?
Let me start there. What's un-American is this idea that whenever there's military action, the only reasonable response is just support our troops and salute the flag and move out and not ask questions. That's what's un-American, right? We have civilian control of the military, and we have elected officials in Congress that have a constitutional obligation to ask tough questions to make sure that our military is being used wisely. I went to war 3 times for our country. I was a paratrooper. I was an Army Ranger. I deployed 3 times to Iraq and Afghanistan. And we spent, as a nation, 20 years at war. We spent $3 trillion, over 6,000 American lives, a tremendous amount of American credibility down the drain because Congress stopped having a debate and asking the tough questions and taking votes to authorize military force. And had we been forced to do that, and to be clear, 12 Congresses, both Republican and Democratic controlled, now 5 different administrations, both Republican and Democrat, so both sides have done this, have used these blank checks provided by Congress after 9/11 to do endless military conflicts, engagements, and strikes. Right. And that's what you end up with. You end up with 20 years of war, trillions of dollars are spent, and no real tough questions being asked. So, no, I completely reject that notion. We not only can, but must hold in high regard and appreciate the service of our troops. And in this regard, remarkable mission actually conducted by our troops in Iran. But that's very different from saying, was this in our national interest? What did we actually accomplish? Was this a good use of taxpayer dollars? And was this a constitutional violation, once again, by cutting Congress, the people's house, and the people's representatives out of matters of war and peace? And that is my concern. And I believe undoubtedly it was. Right. I sit on the Intelligence Committee. I sit on the Armed Services Committee. And there should be no intelligence provided to the president that also isn't provided to Congress, because it's Congress that builds the military, that decides how many planes and ships and soldiers we have, that funds it, and actually passes the laws that the president uses to carry out missions. So we need the same information, and we're just
Yeah,
not getting
this
it.
is not going to be the administration of sharing. Their number one goal is to consolidate as much executive power as possible. It was in
Yeah.
Project 2025, blah, blah, blah. I've been saying this for a long time and we still lost the election. But are you hopeful that we can move in that direction? And if there's any light that you can shed on kind of where we stand, or do you have concerns about further entanglement in the Middle East as a result of the strikes that we have so far taken? Or do you feel like it's going to be calmer and the ceasefire is going to hold?
Yeah, I always have concerns. I mean, we have this tendency of getting pulled into Middle East conflict that we just can't shake. We just can't get out of, right? And again, Republicans have done it, Democrats have done it. The amount of money and lives and credibility and time that we've spent on conflict in the Middle East is astonishing. And there's actually bipartisan support around the notion of saying enough is enough. I actually view this more as, the private that I used to be and the captain that I used to be. I actually started as an enlisted man. I was Private Crow, and then I ultimately became an officer. Was Captain Crow in the Rangers. And what I learned is that every time some politician or Washington elite pounds their chest, and usually they're, some Ivy League educated person that's never served in the military. Not always, but usually they pound their chest, they talk tough. It's some working class kid like me from the middle of the country that's got to pick up a rifle or get into a plane or jump into a tank and actually do the dirty work and get it done. And I've kind of had it with that, right? And now that I'm a member of Congress and have a say and have a platform, that's who I'm speaking for. It's those young kids, those men and women that actually have to do the tough stuff that these chest pounding politicians like to talk about to make themselves feel tough. Well, I'm speaking up and I'm standing up for those kids out there in Oklahoma and Nebraska and Wisconsin and Colorado that ultimately have to bear the burden.
There are a lot of problems plaguing the party, but one of them seems to be a dearth of authenticity. Um, you seem like a pretty genuine article. Can you talk about how you're perceiving that and what you think we can do about it?
First of all, I'm going to generalize here because there's an awful lot of amazing colleagues. I have a lot of friends and colleagues who are flipping seats and holding Republican held seats that are doing this really well. But the truth is, in November, we lost 90% of American counties, right? And you can't have a majority and you can't, more importantly, govern if that's what's happening. So the bottom line for me is that, authenticity matters, and just being you, just saying the thing matters, right? Instead of presenting this caricature or projecting this, politician image of folks, is that you just need to connect. And part of that is showing up to places that are important, to things that are important, right? Democrats think we're having policy discussions when everybody else just wants to know, are they seen? Are they respected? Are they heard? Do you understand their life, right? And writing off things that matter to communities, history and tradition, whether it's the Friday night football games or the fish fries or going to the parades. I grew up going to Fourth of July parades. I grew up saluting the flag and getting a chill down my back and getting goosebumps, which I still do today, by the way, getting goosebumps every time the national anthem is played at an event. And that's not to say that I look at our nation with rose-colored glasses. That's not to say that I don't understand our difficult history and how we have failed to live up to our expectations and our quest for a more perfect union, because we have in so many ways, and I see that throughout the country. But the promise of that and the quest for that being better matters, and that's why I believe in patriotism. And Democrats too often don't do that, right? You don't show up to the NASCAR game. You don't show up to the Army Navy game. I went to the Army Navy game this last fall, which is one of the greatest rivalries in sports, right? And it's, our nation's military battling it out on the gridiron. And, President Biden didn't show up to that. He's the commander in chief. Who did show up? Donald Trump. And he got a standing ovation from a lot of people there. Yeah, and the Daytona 500 is another example, right? Like, this stuff matters to a lot of people. It matters to me. And if you don't show up, that's taken as a slight. So we just got to show up. We have to be real. We have to be ourselves, and we have to stop telling Americans why they should feel better than they do. That's the other piece. Is people just believe that the American dream is dead for them and out of reach. A lot of Americans, most Americans, I think, believe that. The American dream, which to me, growing up, means the ability to buy a home, to build equity and to retire with dignity, to um, have quality health care, and to have your children's life turn out better than yours, and to have access to education for them. That is out of reach for most Americans now. Simple fact. And all too often we find Democrats saying, well, you should feel better than you really do, or here's why you shouldn't feel bad about that. No, I mean, screw that. People feel pretty bad about it, and they're frustrated as hell. So why don't we actually engage in that conversation and then figure out how we can fix it?
Did you know that we were going to lose in November?
I thought it was 50-50.
Okay.
I was afraid we were going to
Yeah.
lose. And because I was paying attention. Listen, I come from a conservative background and family, right? Most of my family are Trump supporters. Most of the people I grew up with are Trump supporters. I grew up in the, upper Midwest. Spent the first 10 years of my life in a town, of less than 15,000 people. And then I spent a whole bunch of time in the fall traveling around rural America in some of the toughest districts in the country. And I knew something was off. If you're paying attention and if you're getting outside of, you know, liberal bubbles, it's not too hard to see that something is off.
Yeah. There were a lot of flags at our convention, but it seems that it did not do enough to affirm to people that we were a patriotic party or a party that was going to be able to provide the kind of opportunity that you're talking about. And I think you're so right on the American dream. I work in polling. I've been tracking this for a very long time, and it's getting bleaker and bleaker. And now that you have, the age of when you're going to be able to buy a home now at 40, that's just absolutely unheard of. Like when I talk to my mom about this, who's a mid-boomer, right? They're on their second home by then, right? They've already had a starter home and they were able to move up the ladder. These are all kind of like different sides of the same question. But what you're talking about, and this kind of patriotism, this kind of nationalism can become more of, I guess, the general ethos of how we talk about issues and how we talk to people.
Yeah, how can we translate that?
Like, how do we make this more a part of the discourse? This is airing on the 4th of July. People will be out at those parades, feeling the same way that you do, the same way that I do, excited about this, understanding that we are part of the greatest democratic experiment in human history, but that it is an experiment. And it feels like it's teetering in a very bad direction right now.
Well, I grew up, I grew up kind of thinking that American democracy was inevitable. I mean, why would it be any other way? Right? Like, this is the way it is. It's going to last forever. It's everyone, regardless of whether you are Democrat or Republican, you believed in rule of law, you believed in the Constitution. Like, there were policy disagreements, I'm simplifying it because we've been through a civil war, we've been through a civil rights movement, we've been through a suffrage movement, like all these like massive battles and big things in our history, which is the story of America, the story of struggle between our highest ideals and our worst impulses. Right? That is the story of America, and that's constantly the tension. But growing up, kind of thought, oh, there's an inertia and momentum to this, and I think the lesson of the last decade, roughly, so long as I've been involved in politics, because I didn't grow up around politics, I've been doing it for about 8 years now, is that it's not inevitable. Right. And there's no norm or institution or momentum that will just save us and ensure that it goes on forever. What it actually is just people, Americans, men and women, standing up generation after generation and re-earning it with sacrifice. Whether that be the greatest generation during World War II, whether that be the Freedom Riders during the Civil Rights Movement, whether that's the suffragettes, or the Civil War. It always has to be re-earned, and the re-earning of that takes tremendous sacrifice by individuals, by people. And we're in one of those moments again. None of us asked to be in that moment, by the way, to be in one of those handful of moments where we have to preserve the union and move it in the right direction. But that's always the nature of leadership too, right? Is that you never get to choose your moment, right? That moment is thrust upon you, and your only choice and decision is to whether or not you will step up and how much you're willing to give.
What do you think about the idea of having a national service requirement?
I like that idea. I don't know if we need to start with a requirement because forcing it is not necessarily in the spirit of service either. But here's something I know. Actually, I am a member of the Bipartisan Veterans
Yeah.
Caucus in Congress. I actually was the chair of it last Congress. We started it in 2018. Roughly equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats. There's almost 40 of us
Yeah.
now in the Bipartisan Veterans Caucus. And we've made national service, not just military service, but national service, a core element of our work. Because what we know is that when, city kids get together with farm kids and white, black, Asian, Latino, straight, gay people actually roll up their sleeves and build something, literally work together, get dirty, get sweaty, kind of suffer together, that foxhole mentality, that it breaks down barriers and it connects us. And I think that has been a connecting tie for America, is that people have worked together, fought together, and those have been the moments where we have done our greatest things. And, we were losing that. And what's amazing is that here's some data that's actually really pretty fascinating. Um, there are about 20 times more young people in America who want to do national service than there are opportunities for them to do national service, right? So for every slot in AmeriCorps and Peace Corps and Teach for America and Civilian Conservation Corps in the military, there are 19 other young Americans who want one of those positions and want to serve, then there's room for. So there's tremendous unmet need right now, right? If we just vastly expanded the pipeline of opportunity, those people would serve our communities. They would help rebuild, rural impoverished areas. They would help, clean our forests and rebuild our national parks. They would work together, build solidarity and community. And there's a whole bunch of young folks who want to do it. We just don't have the pipeline. So we've been working hard to try to increase that pipeline. Unfortunately, this administration is drastically cutting a lot of those programs, which be really bad for our country.
Yeah. The cuts don't make a lot of sense in general, but especially when you're talking about programs like that, which I assume that there are plenty of young Republican kids that really want to go do Teach for America and these programs. Like when I was graduating college, we had a good chunk of people that wanted to go and do that. And a lot of them stayed in the system that way. Then they became public school teachers wherever they had gone to teach. We're talking about civilian service in general, but I do want to talk about veterans specifically. So after you served, you went and got a law degree, went to work for veterans. Can you talk about that experience and what you kind of think is the current state of the veteran community here in the country?
Yeah. So I did. I was a paratrooper, Army Ranger, did my tours, then used veterans benefits to go to law school, and was in private practice, but did a whole bunch of veterans pro bono work, helping veterans and veterans organizations resettle. And the reason I did that is because when I left the service, it was a tough transition, right? It's tough for any combat veteran to transition, right? Because you're going, I remember this time when I was starting law school and I was going through orientation, and you go through orientation and you sit around in these little circles and chairs and you're like, "Hi, my name is Jason. I've been an Army Ranger the last couple of years." And no kidding, one of the students was like, "Army Ranger, like, why does the Army have Rangers? Like, I thought only national parks had Rangers." And I'm like, "Different type of Ranger."
Also cool,
Was
but
wasn't wearing one of the hats. But that was my first moment. I'm like, huh, they don't really understand.
I'm
Like
different.
the civilian military divide is pretty wide in our country right now. Point being that transition is tough and getting tougher because of the civilian military divide. And it's tough, right? And, we had the VA system is not working for a lot of vets. That's why we have, almost 20 veterans a day taking their lives. We have massive wait times. There's a lot of suffering within the veterans community that I see, and with some of my friends. And I struggled to get my own benefits. Actually, there was one point at which I wasn't getting paid. I wasn't getting my benefits, and I'm like, well, I think I'm gonna have to drop out of school actually because I can't pay my rent and pay my tuition because I'm not getting my money. And so when I finally did figure that out and get my benefits, I'm like, all right, this is not working, so I'm going to help other vets do the same. And that kind of started me off on the path that ultimately led me, frankly, to Congress, because I realized that this was a political issue more than anything else.
Mm. It's a shame that it has to be that way. I feel like there's so much lip service given to the community. Like everyone knows that you're supposed to say the right thing about veterans, but so few people are actually doing the right thing. I love hearing though that the Veterans Caucus is actually split, and there, must be Republicans that you have found a great way to work together with.
Yeah, definitely try. By the way, one of the reasons there is a lot of, free pie on Veterans Day and like come in for your free breakfast at Denny's, which, is all well and good. But, when we have a system that's fundamentally not serving folks the way it should be, that's the larger issue. And after I was finishing law school and applying for law jobs, do you know how I knew during an interview that I absolutely was not going to get the job?
No.
It's when they ended
Thank
the
you for your
interview
service.
by thanking me for service. Yep.
As I was thinking about doing it, should I not?
They're like, thank you for your service. I'm like, thank you. Have a good
I will
day. I'm
never
not
see you
getting this
again.
job, am I? Yeah.
Is that, I mean, this is a very trivial question, but is it annoying when people do that? I think about it. Like, should I do this? Is it?
No, it's not. It's not annoying because it's coming from a good place. It doesn't annoy me because it's coming from a good place. I listen. People mean it well. We haven't done a good job of equipping civilians because that military civilian divide is so wide right now. We haven't done a good job of equipping the civilian world with the tools necessary to do that, right? To really ask the right questions and show an interest, either to do something, do an act of service, or to actually do something substantive to help a veteran, or instead of thanking you for your service, what I always recommend people do is ask a question. Be like, hey, why did you serve? What did your service mean to you? Like, what do you still carry right now from your service? Like, show an actual interest and ask a question and listen. And because what that does is it helps break down that divide and it helps teach you something, but it actually helps relieve the burden on the veteran of that service, right? Because every veteran carries some burden from their time, and often you carry it alone, silently, and it's heavy. And there's that wall that people want to thank you for your service or give you the free pie, but it ends there. They don't actually want to know the tough things that you had to do on their behalf. They would rather not know. That's why we end up with 20-year wars that cost trillions of dollars because a very small number of people bear the burden and everybody else goes on with their lives. So that has to end, right? We as a society, if we're going to send people off to fight for us and bear that burden, everybody needs to bear it to some degree. And that sometimes is as simple as asking a question about what your service meant and what you still carry with you.
I love that as an alternative. And it also starts a conversation, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, where you can show that you actually care about someone and that even if you don't understand, you're curious. We always end by asking our guests, what's one thing that makes you rage and one thing that you think we should all calm down about?
I don't do rage well.
No?
I mean, I get angry and mad, but I find raging generally to be not productive because when you rage, it clouds your judgment.
Okay.
And it makes you act more out of emotion than logic. And as a former combat leader, raging doesn't get you where you need to be, right? So that's different from anger, right? You can be angry as hell. And the thing that makes me more angry than anything else is when the strong take advantage of the weak, right? When people will take advantage of the vulnerable. I was going to say, I was going to use the F word.
It's okay. You can. If
I
it's
get, I
authentic,
get,
I'm into it.
I get really fired up. Right? That's what makes me really angry, and what drives me. And frankly, there's a lot of that happening. So I'm pretty pissed a lot these days.
What do you think we should all calm down about?
What should we calm down about?
It could be like a sports thing. I mean, I've heard a lot of stuff. It doesn't
Okay.
have to be
Yeah.
a high-minded
Well, I'm
political opinion.
I just established the fact that I'm fired up.
Yeah, but like it's 4th of July weekend, you know, calm down, spend
Yeah.
time with your family.
What we need to do is we need to talk about your friends, neighbors, family. Like, stop viewing everybody as the enemy, right? If they have an R or a D behind their name, let's calm down about that. Because listen, Washington is not going to solve this, right? And I'm not trying to pass the buck or shuck responsibility here. Washington obviously has a really important a piece to play in this. But the bind that we find our country in right now, the vitriol and the partisanship, the fix is not going to come from Washington. The fix to that is going to come from America, from Rotary clubs, from community organizations, from neighborhood block parties, from everyone taking a step back and being, all right, let's reconnect and stop viewing each other as the enemy. And let's calm down about that.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time. I won't say thank you for your service, but thank you for talking to me about your service and how we can have a more service-oriented American culture, which I think would be a net positive for all of us. I'm deeply appreciative that you stopped by. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jessica. I enjoyed it.